All right, we're going to talk about river cultures with a focus on the river culture in Egypt. There have been several river cultures in history, and they share many common traits. Egypt, however, is the one we will specifically focus on. But before we start discussing the river cultures, we need to talk about what happened earlier. During this period, humans transitioned from being hunters to becoming farmers. Previously, people might have hunted for what they needed for the day to survive. Moving around and following the animals or food sources until the hunting in an area was exhausted. Once people settled down, they began to farm specific land. This shift to farming meant that people stayed in one place, unlike before, when they were constantly on the move. As people settled, they also domesticated dogs and livestock to ensure a stable food supply. This period saw the development of early agricultural societies, which in many ways laid the foundation for what we recognize as modern civilization. Egypt, as well as the broader region known as the Fertile Crescent, is often cited as the birthplace of agriculture. It is called Bördiga halvmånen in Swedish. It is believed that agriculture began around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. During this time, people learned to grind grain into flour, which was then used to bake bread. They also started saving a portion of their harvest, which allowed them to plant again the following season. This marked the beginning of planning for the future. It is believed that agriculture emerged in regions around Egypt, Israel, and near the Black Sea. This was the area where early agricultural societies began to flourish. Here you can see a map showing how agriculture spread across the world. You can observe how it expanded across Europe, into what is now Russia, and up into Finland. This spread also influenced the development of languages and other aspects of culture. The map illustrates the diffusion of agriculture with the yellow regions highlighting areas where farming practices were especially prevalent and from which they spread further. You can open the first page of your note sheet. We are going to talk specifically about ancient Egypt, including its history, the time when the pyramids were built, and much more. To begin, let's delve into the Nile River, around which a river culture emerged. The Nile was incredibly important, and Egypt's geography played a crucial role in its protection throughout history. One key aspect is the river itself, as it served as a natural defense against invading armies. Armies found it challenging to cross the river, which made settlements along the Nile quite secure. If someone tried to cross by boat, it was difficult to transport large forces or supplies, giving the inhabitants time to defend themselves. Another reason Egypt was well protected is the vast deserts surrounding it. These deserts made it extremely difficult for large armies to travel, as they required significant resources, and the harsh conditions made movement slow and exhausting. Due to its geographic advantages, Egypt remained well protected and was able to focus on monumental projects like building the pyramids. The Nile is crucial for Egypt for several reasons. One significant reason is that Egypt divided the year into 3 seasons, the first being the flooding season. This occurred when there was a rainy season in tropical Africa, causing the Nile to overflow. The Egyptians managed this overflow by directing the water to their fields through irrigation systems, which allowed them to sow their crops. Once the water receded, they would harvest. In this way, the Nile was the foundation of life in Egypt, providing the necessary water for agriculture. If the Nile didn't flood, people would face famine, making the river absolutely essential for survival in this region. Now, you can turn to page 2 of your notebook as we discuss the different kingdoms of Egypt. If we start by dividing Egyptian history into different epochs, we begin with the Old Kingdom. An epoch is essentially a period of time marked by certain common features. The Old Kingdom spans from around 2700 to 2200 BCE. During this period, the pharaoh was seen as a god, owning all the land. Farmers would rent land from the pharaoh and pay taxes to him. This period was marked by a great deal of peace, which allowed the labor force to be used effectively. This is when the pyramids were built, serving as the tombs for the pharaohs. What's particularly interesting about the pyramids is how people were motivated to construct such enormous structures. The belief was that the pharaoh was a god who controlled the Nile, so if they kept the pharaohs satisfied, the Nile would continue to flood, ensuring a good harvest. This belief system enabled the pharaoh to mobilize a large workforce to build the pyramids. The most famous of these is the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is often featured in documentaries about its construction. The Old Kingdom eventually ended with civil war, conflict between different groups within the same country, and famine, which occurred when the Nile failed to flood. This led to a period of chaos and the beginning of a new era. However, the Old Kingdom was a time of prosperity, marked by the construction of these monumental pyramids. During the Middle Kingdom, which lasted from around 2050 to 1650 BCE, Egypt experienced civil war. This conflict led to Thebes becoming the capital. During this period, Egypt was invaded and ruled for about 100 years by the Hyksos people. This was a time of great unrest and internal strife. The Egyptians also learned to use chariots from the Hyksos, which had a significant impact on their military tactics. Due to the ongoing conflicts, Egypt did not have the economic resources or the labor force to build pyramids, as had been done during the Old Kingdom. Instead, there was a focus on fortifying their defenses and adapting to the new military technologies. On the slide, you can see images of the ruins of Thebes, which can still be studied today to gain insight into how the Egyptians lived during this turbulent period. The New Kingdom, which lasted from around 1550 to 1050 BCE, was a period marked by external threats and internal challenges. Egypt was attacked multiple times, which drained the military and the state's treasury. War, after all, is expensive. Although the Egyptians managed to earn some wealth through military campaigns and tributes, they were also struck by a severe drought along the Nile. This drought was catastrophic, as it directly affected the food supply. When the harvest failed, pharaohs could no longer pay their workers, who were often compensated with food. This led to widespread strikes due to food shortages. The last significant pharaoh of this period was Ramesses III. After his death, his descendants quarreled over control of Egypt, leading to the division of the kingdom into two parts. This division marked the end of Egypt's era of greatness that we have been discussing. The once unified and powerful Egypt began to decline, and the period of its historical prominence came to an end. This summary of Egyptian history, through its different epochs, helps us keep track of how the civilization evolved and eventually faced its decline. Now turn to page 3 in your note sheet as we discuss what life was like in ancient Egypt. Most people were farmers, and many were serfs. Being a serf meant that you were essentially bound to the land you worked on. You couldn't choose where to live or what job to do. In a way, you were considered part of the land, not fully free to make decisions about your life. People married young, primarily with the intention of having children. However, women in ancient Egypt had some rights that might seem surprisingly modern for the time. They could divorce and inherit property, and they often had jobs. So, despite the ancient setting, there were aspects of life in these river cultures that had progressive elements, especially concerning women's roles and rights. When it comes to life and death, the ancient Egyptians believed in an afterlife. They thought that the soul resided in various parts of the body, which needed to be preserved. The idea was that the soul would return to the body after death. So they mummified the body to ensure it was well preserved. This process, known as mummification, was designed to protect the body for the soul's return to life. This belief is also why the pharaohs built pyramids, to ensure that their bodies would be protected for their eventual return. Mummification was an expensive process, and only wealthy Egyptians could afford it. Now, turn to page 4 in your notebook as we discuss sources of historical knowledge. How do we know all this? Much of what we know comes from hieroglyphs, the ancient Egyptian writing system. Hieroglyphs have provided us with detailed insights into how the pyramids were built, how people lived, what jobs they had, and how much food they produced. Written records are incredibly important because they were created during the time these events occurred, providing us with a direct link to the past. Why did the Egyptians write so much? The answer lies in the surplus of food created by their efficient agricultural practices. When people had more food than they needed, they could trade it in markets. This surplus allowed some people to pursue other occupations besides farming. Among these new occupations were scribes, people who made a living by writing. The development of a writing profession was directly tied to the agricultural surplus, which freed people to engage in other activities. The reason we have so much written material from ancient Egypt is because their agriculture was so successful, enabling a segment of the population to work as scribes and record important information. Understanding how hieroglyphs were deciphered is a fascinating topic, and it all centers around something called the Rosetta Stone, Rosettastenen in Swedish. Before the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, no one had any idea how to read hieroglyphs. Although many texts had been found, their meaning remained a mystery because the knowledge of how to read hieroglyphs had been lost, and there was no one who could translate them. The Rosetta Stone, shown in the image, was key to unlocking this ancient writing system. The stone is a slab that contains the same text written in 3 different scripts: hieroglyphic, a simpler form of hieroglyphic writing, and Greek. This is similar to when I ask you to translate a Swedish text into English during our lessons. You have the same text in 2 languages. Because scholars could read Greek, they were able to use it as a guide to decipher the hieroglyphs. By comparing the Greek text with the hieroglyphic text, they gradually figured out what the hieroglyphs meant, allowing them to understand the ancient writings. The Rosetta Stone is crucial because it enabled us to read and understand texts from ancient Egypt. Thanks to this discovery, we can now read about how the pyramids were built, what people wrote in their tombs, and much more. The Rosetta Stone has been incredibly important for our understanding of ancient Egyptian history. It provided us with a vast amount of source material, allowing us to learn a great deal about how the ancient Egyptians lived. As we conclude this video, take a moment to review the key points listed on the left. First, understand the importance of the Nile River to the ancient Egyptians. Why was it so crucial, and how did they benefit from it? Next, familiarize yourself with the 3 main periods of ancient Egyptian history. What significant events occurred during these epochs? Additionally, recognize the importance of hieroglyphs, the Egyptian writing system. Why was it vital to the Egyptians? And what did they use it for? Lastly, learn about the Rosetta Stone. What is it, and why is it so significant in helping us understand ancient Egypt? If you're unclear about any of these topics, feel free to watch the video again to solidify your understanding. The essential terms related to these points are listed in the video description, so be sure to check that out to ensure you grasp all the key concepts. Thank you for watching, and if you're ready to continue exploring, you can click here to view the next video.